Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet.
This review is brought to you in part by Dean's Hobby Stop in Owasso, Michigan. Better call Dean before he closes the doors for good. This review covers the 1940 Willys Coupe-Pickup. It's a 125 scale kit from AMT, number 6544. Now, the Willys cars and pickups were desired for gas-class drag racing back in the 60s and in the 70s because they were cheap and, more importantly, they were light compared to a lot of the other cars of the time. In this review, we're going to build the pickup version as a show-and-go drag racer. Now, the kit was originally issued in 1964, and it's been reissued a number of times since then. The original was just a coupe, but the pickup parts were added in 1973. Now, the kit has 116 parts molded in yellow, clear, and chrome with black vinyl tires. And when you're done, the kit's about 6 3/4 inches long, 3 1/4 inches wide, and 2 3/4 inches tall. And oh, that's Newt. He's behind the partition there. He's our program director with a question. So what's your question, Newt?
That looks great. I really like the tilt front end too.
Yeah, and that was a great feature for racers of that era because it was much easier to work on the engine, especially if you're out at the track. And here are the contents of the kit. As you can see, they're pretty well designed on the trees. The chrome is still in pretty good shape. And there's a lot of extra parts because you can build this either way as a coupe or a pickup. Now, we'll be using mostly liquid cement as we go along, sometimes super glue for strength or white or clear glue for the windows though. And remember to heed the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines when you use any of the products that you see or hear used in the review. What you see here is the Fat 40 stripe decals that go on the coupe version. They don't really fit on the pickup, so we won't be using those. But they're nice, their register is good, and the color is nice. And here are the sponsor decals that we'll be using, to show off the sponsors for this gasser. Construction begins with building the tires and wheels, and the tires are pretty nice. They're hollow, they've got nice sidewall detail and tread. However, the slicks, they look a little bit big for this class of racer, and the front tires are too wide for a drag racer, if you want some realism, but they look great anyway. The street version uses 2 different sizes of tires that are actually more appropriate. Now you can go ahead and assemble the wheel and tires sub-assemblies there, and I painted the inner wheels chrome to match the car. It's kind of a show-and-go dragster, so go ahead and assemble those, but remember you have to scrape chrome and paint off of mating surfaces when you're gluing parts together or they won't stick. And so here, as you see, you simply just sandwich the tires between the inner and outer wheels and then set them aside to dry. Next, we'll get into the supercharger construction, and remember that the instructions for the model are all at the end of the review here if you need to look those over for clarification. But go ahead and scrape the mating parts off, and then we'll start to stage those with assembly for the engine. Next, locate the parts for the engine and clean those up of any attachment points or light flash or parting lines that you want to remove, and assemble those together in group. And here you see that the engine on the cradle there was painted gold, and the transmission is a silver color. Most of the parts for this motor are chrome, and then of course there's some rubber parts that are painted flat black. So we can go ahead and assemble the complete motor along with the exhaust headers, as you see attached here just underneath there on the cylinder heads. And a good view here gives you an idea of how the motor goes together. Now it's, like I said, it's going to be a pretty one, and we'll include, of course, the pre-assembled supercharger sub-assembly there. So you can go ahead and put all that together, and we'll let that set and dry. Next, we move to the interior build. You can see the parts there. Clean those all up appropriately and get those staged for construction. Now, the pickup version is built up as a street rod by the instructions. So there's going to need to be 2 holes drilled in the interior tub to mount the roll bar. And they're not really marked, but you should place them as far back as possible and use the roll bar to get the width for that position. As you see here, my completed interior, the roll bar is painted chrome with a little maroon accent there, almost a cranberry, and that was included on the seat inserts as well as the carpet and side panels. And then there are chrome appointments like, the window cranks and the steering wheel spokes. Of course, the shifter goes into position there too. But once you've picked out your color scheme, go ahead and assemble it as you see here, including the dashboard and assembly there. Next, we'll turn our attention to the cab and part of the body, and you can see the parting lines there that I've highlighted along those ridges, but they're easily removed with some scraping or sand sticks and sandpaper. And after prepping the cab and spraying the paint on, the front and rear glass gets added to the interior tub with some clear glue and pushed up inside of the cab. What you see here is the shaded area that they show in the instructions that should be removed with a handsaw to use the frame for the pickup version. But it's kind of a problem, because if you do that according to these areas, you're going to lose part of the frame rails. And so, to remedy the situation, turn the chassis over and trim it along the frame rails. You can use the backside of a hobby knife to scribe those areas, or just be careful not to cut off most of the chassis rails. But you see here, you'll need to do some trimming to the flat part of the chassis just above the frame rails. And you can see the black segments there of the frame rails still intact after you're done. And here's an illustration of the bed parts that you'll need to gather up and go ahead and assemble. You can see that they've suggested colors for it, but you'll be needing to use your own design to determine what colors to use there. So go ahead and assemble the bed. It consists of the floor, the sides, front and rear panels. And after the box is built, the fenders are added and the optional bed tarp can be put into place. And this is a little out of sequence, but the bed should be added to the chassis before the cab. Now we can prepare the front end. This is a tilt bed front end, that has some parting lines on the fenders there, as you see, but they're once again easily removed. Just scrape them off, use some fine sandpaper to eliminate them, and stage the parts here as you see. And the inner fender panels, they're part of the hinge and the grill for the front end, so get those ready to assemble. And now you see here some of the pieces for the front end were sprayed with the Molotow chrome paint. Now you can get a refill version of that paint and use it through a spray gun if you want to get a good silvery chrome type of finish on your parts. So these are all going to be staged. The front suspension and the parts need to dry. One thing about that though, handling will rub off this chrome paint pretty easily, so you'll want to do that as little as possible. After the frame was primed, it was then sprayed with some gloss chrome or black paint, and we can assemble those suspension pieces. The rear suspension is actually pretty easy to put together because the axle stubs come out of the quick change rear end, and then they just protrude through the mounts on the springs, and the springs then are glued to the chassis. Now just remember, you got to scrape off any chrome or paint before you want to glue those, but use some strong glue to put them in place. The front suspension, of course, has some small attachment points, and you may want to use some super glue on that. Once the suspension is thoroughly dried, you can go ahead and add the wheels. Just be careful not to put too much pressure on them, and make sure you put them straight on so that they go into position. And you can either glue them or just leave them to rotate, but I think they're better off being glued in this case. There's not really locks on those hubs. And next we're going to use a component here for the fuel tank. And the fuel tank, it's got a parting line on it. You're going to either have to remove it and repaint with some chrome paint, or just live with it. And of course there's the knockoff there for the filler. So go ahead and assemble that, and we'll get that ready for addition to the chassis. And so you see, you can add the cab or the interior to the cab, then the cab to the frame. Just look for your location points, use some strong glue, and it was painted a silver, just like the bed sides were, along with the cab front end, painted a metallic silver and added to that chassis. Now also you can locate the mounts for the engine and put the engine into position. Now make sure that your fuel tank there was glued into the front end, just behind the grill here, as you see. And the front end is going to take a little bit of work. First, of course, you have to align it so that it meets the cab. Now I found it necessary to sand a little bit off of the backside of the hood to get the fenders to touch a little closer. Even then, it's not a real good fit. And you'll have to do a little bit of, I'm going to say, massaging and test fitting to get a good fit for that front end. Also, you can put the headlight lenses into the bezels and black out the grill and add that to the front end. And so most of your construction is finished, and you can add your decals now. The larger one there on the door, those were from the parts bin, and so you can just about use most of the sponsor decals, and it's a really nice looking vehicle when you get it done. It's a real head turner on the shelf. Now go ahead and let those dry, and you could give them a little bit of time before you start handling it, but she's essentially finished. Now here you see the parts that are left over for the kit. Of course, the coupe body and the interior is a bit different, but there's really not a lot of extra pieces, but these are pretty large ones that you'll find useful to put into your bin. Well, there you have it. Your model is complete, and as you can see, it's a real gorgeous little Quicksilver treat for your shelf. If you use some time and attention, you can actually make this look really outstanding. And as you see it sitting, yeah, the tires are a little big for this class, but boy, it looks pretty good all in all, just as a model, and something that is kind of harkens back to the 60s when these vehicles were all the rage. The Willys pickup and coupes were just a standard fare on the hot rod circuit, and you could see them just about on any drag strip in the country at that time. They were just commonly used, and they were well adapted to adding large V8s and large tire and suspensions. So it really takes us back, and I think it's a real nice looking model when it's finished. And if you massage that front end so the tilt cab works pretty well, or the tilt front end, it actually is a good show and go roadster. Special premium model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can do that by clicking on the icon in the lower right of any of our reviews, and you can find us on Facebook or our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.